Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Baltany S6074 GMT. This watch is available from baltany.com for €279. The watch is clearly an homage to the Rolex GMT-Master 6542 Bakelite from 1954. So firstly, let's look at the travel case that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items that come with the piece. So the watch comes in a PU leather travel case, which is protected by this cardboard outer box. One withdraws the drawer from the sleeve, and inside we have the travel case, which I'll show you. So PU leather and embossed with Baltany, good stitching throughout. We have a strap around it and the brass rivets, and inside there's also another piece of PU leather. So you put this piece between the case back and the bracelet, and that prevents the bracelet rubbing against the case back and scuffing and scratching it when the watch is in transit. So good attention to detail. Quality of the finishing is good, and Baltany deserve credit. It's nice to see a PU leather travel roll used rather than using the default option of a plastic or cardboard watch box. You also get this cardboard envelope, which is branded with Baltany in gilt. Very nice presentation. Inside we have a Baltany branded spring bar tool and also a 1.6mm flat-headed screwdriver for resizing the screw pins in the bracelet links, which is good. This is the warranty card, and I'm pleased to report that all Baltany watches are covered by a 2-year international warranty, which is very good. Stamped with Baltany, filled in with the date of purchase and the retailer code. This is the owner's instruction manual, clear concise diagrams. The instructions are in English, and it details the operation of the movement used, which is the Seiko Caliber NH35A automatic. And lastly, one also gets this Baltany branded microfiber polishing cloth. I always think it's a nice touch to get a branded microfiber polishing cloth, irrespective of the price point of a piece. So with regards to the specifications, we have a 39mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 47.4mm. We have a thickness of 13.7mm, a lug width of 20mm. The Jubilee style bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 16mm at the 2-button push clasp. Clasp is signed to a good standard with high definition engraving. The Baltany brand logo is engraved. Beautiful luster to the 316L grade stainless steel, nice sheen to it, and brush satin finish to the flanks. They've made the correct decision by having 4 micro adjustment holes, so that allows for fine tuning the length of the bracelet. Often with Jubilee style bracelets, adding or subtracting one full Jubilee style link isn't enough to get the correct fit. It either feels too tight or too loose. So by having the 4 micro adjustment holes rather than just 2 or 3, one can fine tune the length. Nice heavy gauge to the 2-button push clasp, it feels solid, and I like the contrasting mirror polished bevel to the edge, which marks the transition between the brush satin finish flank and the top side, which is brush satin finish to that beautiful luster. Good frame resistance to the 2-button push triggers, feels solid and reliable. The interior is solid milled 316L grade stainless steel, as one would expect. Hinge pins are tight, no sharp edges, no burrs, doesn't have sharp corners, and it articulates very well. Snaps shut with a nice positive click, so it's a well executed 2-button push clasp. With regards to the rest of the specification, we have a double dome sapphire crystal with clear AR coating on the underside, and the AR coating does an excellent job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the double dome sapphire crystal. It's got a boxed top hat style profile to it. It looks very thick, but I was surprised to find this is only 13.7mm thick, because normally with boxed top hat style crystals, one expects the piece to be tall and thick and 14mm, but 13.7 is acceptable, bearing in mind it houses the NH34A automatic, which is a thick movement. Another surprise was it's 200 meters water resistant. It's a GMT piece rather than a dive watch, so therefore 100 meters would suffice, but 200 meters is strong specification. So again, to have a thick crystal and thick stainless steel case back to provide 200 meters of hermetic seal rather than 100, it's good that it's only 13.7. It is a wearable piece. It doesn't feel top heavy and thick on the wrist. Fully loomed sapphire bezel insert. So as I've detailed, this is clearly an homage to the Rolex GMT-Master 6542 Bakelite. Originally in the 1950s, Rolex used Bakelite, which is a type of acrylic for the bezel insert. And the problem was that in 1954 they found that the Bakelite had a tendency to crack and break up. So they then switched to using aluminium because it's more robust and it can survive impact damage better than Bakelite, which cracks like acrylic. And this does have the aesthetic of the Bakelite bezel used, although it's a domed profile. The Bakelite Rolex used was a flat profile, but it does have that look of a Bakelite bezel, and they've done a very good job replicating that and adding the dome to it to make it more aesthetically pleasing. So this is made from sapphire crystal, so it's hard and scratch resistant, just like the double dome sapphire crystal used in the watch. They've also fully lumed it, the Arabic numerals and also the triangle and the dots for the hour markers, and they've done that to a very good standard. It's very crisp. The Arabic numerals and the dots are high definition, they're not blurry, and they're fully infilled with C3 Superluminova, which I'll demonstrate in the Lume test. The gilt dial is very aesthetically pleasing and it complements the gilt Mercedes handset. The hands are correctly proportioned, and I want to give due credit to Baltany because often low-tier Chinese brands, the mistake they make is the hands are too short and they're too under proportions. They look too small for the size of the dial, but these hands are actually the right length. If you look at the second hand, it extends all the way to the minute ticks on the gilt chapter ring. The minutes hand, the tip of it extends to the minute ticks on the chapter ring, and the red GMT hour hand also extends to the chapter ring. So the hands are correctly proportioned, they don't look too small, and I think the gilt does complement the nipple dial. So the gilt text on the dial is also printed to a high standard, high definition text, and the minute ticks are also high definition, sharp, crisp printing. So the execution of the dial is excellent, matte black looks good. One detail I really like about this, and I would like to see more brands use this feature, is the date wheel. They have printed red Arabic numerals on a white date wheel. Usually black is the default option, black Arabic numerals on a white date wheel, or alternatively white Arabic numerals on a black date wheel. But as you can see, the red is aesthetically pleasing, but it's also clearly legible. Red Arabic numerals are easy to read and they add interest to it, so I like that. It's not monochrome. The red does match the red of the GMT hour hand and also the red portion of the GMT bezel. So credit where credit's due, Baltany have good attention to detail. So I'll show you the case back. Solid 316L grade stainless steel, concentric CNC lathe tool machining to a good standard, no sharp edges, no burrs to it, and we've got a coin edge finish to the circumference rather than milled slots to screw it down. Low profile, again, this is something Baltany have got correct. Often with low tier Chinese brands, they have a bubble back case back as per Rolex or Tudor watches, which does look aesthetically pleasing, and of course it is comfortable, but it makes the case stand up on the wrist, and therefore there's an unsightly gap beneath the undercut of the lugs. So what you're looking at here is a flat stainless steel case back. Now bear in mind, this has to have adequate clearance to clear the rotor on the NH34A. This is the kind of case back one would expect to see on a manual wind piece with a manual wound movement rather than automatic with a rotor. But as you can see, very flat and low profile, despite housing the NH34A, which is a thick movement. And I like it because it sits perfectly flat on the wrist. And I like it sterile. There's no engraving, but it's very smooth and comfortable against the wrist. So when you're wearing this watch for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day, it's a very comfortable piece, despite being 13.7, it's quite tall. So solid end links in the Jubilee style bracelets, and we've got standard spring bars. The solid end links are a good tight fit to the case. I'll just check the other one to make sure there's no play in it. Nice snug tight fit, so the tolerances are good. They've brushed satin finished the underside to the Jubilee bracelet. No sharp edges, no burrs, which is good. And I like the fact it doesn't pull arm hairs. Often with poorly finished bracelets, they have a tendency to pull arm hairs. This one doesn't, it's very smooth. The flanks are also well deburred. There's no sharp edges on the edges of the flanks, on the top side and the underside. And it is a very well finished Jubilee style bracelet, solid links throughout. The links articulate very well. The end links at the lugs are smooth. I'll just check the other one. They articulate smoothly, but there's no rattle or extra play. The links also articulate very well. They feel nice and tight, and I'm pleased to see screw pins used rather than the cross-cutting measure of push pins. So it does articulate smoothly, but it feels tight. Being a Jubilee style bracelet, there is flex in it, but it doesn't rattle. Poor quality Jubilee bracelets they have a tendency to rattle because there's too much play between the screw pins and the links. But this one feels good. There is flex in it, but it doesn't rattle, and yet it articulates smoothly without any kinks. So excellent. I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet, and I'm pleased to report that Baltany have included enough links in the Jubilee style bracelet to fit up to a 9-inch wrist. As you can see, I can comfortably fit 2 fingers underneath the bracelet and clasp. So plenty of links if you have a larger wrist. This will easily fit you if you have a 8-inch or above wrist. And bear in mind, this is on position 4 of the 4 micro adjustment, so it's now at its maximum. So very good. Often it's the case brands don't include enough links for larger wrists. This does. Now, the articulation is excellent. The Jubilee links articulate very well. They curve around the wrist very well. And as I've detailed, nice undercut to the flank of the case. You can see that flat case back, which is one of my favourite features, rather than being a bubble back case back. We don't have a big gap underneath the tips of the lugs. Again, this is something that so many Chinese brands in the low tier get incorrect. The case back and the flank of the case is too thick. Often they have slab-sided flanks which look like a Tudor Black Bay, for example, very tall flanks to the case, and they sit very tall on the wrist. They're 14mm thick, but this is 13.7 with the double domed sapphire crystal. But as you can see, that snug fit due to the flat case back really does make the comfort and the feeling of wearing it exceptional. Also, the taper is perfect, 20 to 16 at the clasp, perfectly suits a 39mm head of the piece. I really like the aesthetics of the double domed sapphire crystal. It gives it a vintage look, rather like a acrylic crystal, which was used in the 1950s, but we have the clarity with the AR coating. I also like the domed sapphire bezel inserts. It's just beautiful the way it catches the light, and it really works very well with the double domed sapphire crystal. So it's a very aesthetically pleasing piece. And they've done the right thing. They've captured the essence of the Rolex GMT-Master 6542 Bakelite. This does look like a piece from 1954. So nice brushed satin finishing to the tops of the lugs, which complements the mirror polishing to the flanks. Nice crisp edges, which mark the transition between the top of the lugs and the flanks. So comfortable piece to wear. 143 grams isn't excessive heft, and bear in mind that's with all the links. Even I would remove 6 links from this bracelet, which would reduce it to 135 grams. So balance is good, proportions are good, and the quality of the finishing to the head of the piece, the bezel, and the bracelets are outstanding. Right, so let's test the screw down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coin edge finished, no sharp edges, no burrs. The coin edge finishing is crisp. Now, this is the negative to the watch. It's unsigned, it's a sterile crown. And I appreciate this is a low tier piece at €279, but it is unacceptable to have an unsigned crown. They should either emboss or engrave a B for Baltany, and that's inexpensive to do. So I think that Baltany should update the crown and sign it rather than having a sterile crown, because sterile crowns are not acceptable at this price point. But having said that, the mirror polishing on the solid 316L grade stainless steel crown is very good. It's got a nice domed cap to it. So let's test the execution of the crown. Unscrewing it feels smooth. Good interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. And as I've detailed, 200 meters is strong specification for a GMT piece. This isn't a dive watch. 100 meters would have sufficed. So credit where credit's due. 200 is strong. Okay, so in the first position, we are in the manual wind position. So one can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up to its maximum 41-hour power reserve in the NH34A. Feels very similar to the NH35A because the architecture of both movements are the same. The only difference is the NH34A has an additional GMT hour hand stacked on the cannon pinion, but the architecture of both movements is the same, so they feel the same. Putting it out to first click position is the GMT hour hand position, and also sets the date complication. So rotating the crown clockwise rotates the GMT hour hand clockwise. Each hour is indexed with a nice positive click, so it's easy to set the GMT hour. Feels good. Nice firm resistance to the gearing, and I like the fact that it clicks with an index all the way around clockwise. So absolute pleasure to set. and rotating it anti-clockwise in the GMT hour hand position, the first click of the bezel. If you look at the date complication, you can see the red Arabic numerals clearly. The date clicks over with a nice positive click, so it feels exactly the same as an NH35A. It's got that nice positive click feeling one gets with Seiko calibers, and I really like it, and I like the large Arabic numerals in red font. Putting it out to the second click position on the crown hacks the movement. If you look at the second hand, you can see it has now stopped dead. So it's possible to set the time precisely to the second. Clockwise and anti-clockwise, no back play, nice firm resistance in the gearing. The NH34A feels exactly the same as the NH35A. It's an absolute pleasure. You can also rotate the GMT hour hand by rotating the crown clockwise and cycling the hour and minute hand through 24 hours, as you can see. So it's possible to move the GMT hour hand anti-clockwise if you want in the time setting position, because when it's in the first click position, the GMT hour hand only rotates clockwise. When you rotate the crown anti-clockwise, it sets the date rather than moving the GMT hour hand. So very good. One has to push it in with a good positive click to restart the movement, but you can see the second hand begins to sweep around the dial once again. So let's test screwing it back down. Good thread pickup. It feels smooth. Now, it's not silky smooth. There is room for improvement, but it's acceptable. I would describe it as okay. It's a smooth crown execution, but it's not silky smooth. So there is room for refinement. I think it's good enough. Right, so we have a 24 click bi-directional bezel. The bezel is solid 316L grade stainless steel, no old finish, which is very well finished, no sharp edges, but it does feel grippy and one can get good purchase on it. So Baltany deserve credit for this, because often low tier Chinese brands, to cut production costs, they use 120 click unidirectional bezel, which is used on dive pieces. And strictly speaking, a GMT piece should have a bi-directional bezel which clicks both clockwise and anti-clockwise, but of course this is more expensive to produce. It increases production costs and it's often not viable for low-tier pieces to do that. But Baltany have done it. So it's got nice clicks, 24 clicks, feels smooth all the way through the 360 degrees, and it's bi-directional. The clicks feel very smooth, both anti-clockwise and clockwise. It has the same resistance. It's not accidentally going to knock out of position. Often with GMT bezels that are bi-directional, they're friction bezels. They don't have a ratcheting mechanism. And when you brush against the bezel, they have a tendency to slip out of position because the resistance in the spring is too light and it's a negative. This has a clicking mechanism, and I'll explain how it's normally done. Normally with bezel mechanisms, for example on a dive piece with 120 click unidirectional bezel, it has a spring, and the spring engages in grooves in the underside of the stainless steel bezel, and that gives you your click. Now with their bidirectional bezel, they can't do that because the bezel will only rotate unidirectionally, only one direction, with a 120 click unidirectional bezel with the spring going against the grooves. So what they do with a bidirectional bezel is they have ball bearings, and the ball bearings are sprung loaded. They drill holes in the case, and then the ball bearing sits on top of the spring, and the spring gives resistance to the ball bearing. The ball bearing pushes against the grooves, and that means that the ball bearing can depress into the spring, and therefore you get the click in both directions, and it feels even all the way through. So we have 24 clicks of the ball bearing pressing against beneath, and it gives a nice smooth feeling. The ball bearing, which is spring loaded, feels smoother than the click of a spring against the grooves as per a dive piece with 120 clicks. So no lateral side-side play whatsoever, and it's bi-directional, so we don't need to check for back play. And of course, because it's bi-directional, we don't need to check for alignment because you can move the alignments correctly yourself. So the fully Lume triangle aligns very well, and the markers align very well, both the dot hour markers and also the Arabic numerals. And I like the Pepsi bezel colour. It looks very aesthetically pleasing. They've got the colour tone match of the blue and the red. It's done very nicely. It has a vintage aesthetic to it, rather like the Bakelite used on the GMT-Master 6542. Right, so let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up. So, as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged and it has not disappointed. They deserve full credit for this because it is expensive to use a sapphire bezel insert and fully lume it with C3 Superluminova. Good colour tone match between the C3 on the fully lumed sapphire bezel inserts, the nipple dial, the indices, and also we've got the Mercedes handset. So I like the colour tone match. Green C3 is the correct choice. If they'd used BGW9 glowing blue, it wouldn't have looked correct because this is clearly an homage to a 1954 vintage piece, the Rolex GMT-Master 6542 Bakelite. And green does replicate the look of tritium, which was used in the 1950s. It does have that green tone to it. So it's the correct choice. And it's clearly 5 to 6 layers on the sapphire bezel inserts, the nipple dial, and also the Mercedes handset. So this is good performance. You can see it's glowing brightly and it will continue to glow for a good length of time. I'm pleased they haven't used the cost-cutting measure of 3 to 4 layers to save on production costs. This is clearly 5 to 6 and very aesthetically pleasing, but also clearly legible. Now, the nipple dial indices, they are undersized, but that was the style Rolex were using back in the 1950s. And of course, they're not as large as a maxi dial. The indices, which are applied indices, allow for deeper and larger plots, larger areas of superluminova to be applied. But they have done a good job because this is clearly 5 to 6 layers on the applied indices, and you can clearly see the hour markers. And also the Mercedes handset, as I've detailed, they are correctly proportioned in length and size, so they allow for enough plots, enough area for C3 Superluminova to be applied. Still continuing to glow brightly. High definition as well. If you look at the Arabic numerals beneath the sapphire bezel insert, you can see they're not blurry, they look crisp. The numerals are clearly legible, they're not blurry, the edges are sharp. So I really like the quality of the sapphire bezel insert. They've done a good job of inlaying it with C3 Superluminova. It's an expensive process, the production costs are high, and at this price point it is impressive to get that, and also to see a 24-click bi-directional bezel used rather than unidirectional 120-click as per dive piece. So 10 out of 10 performance, I'm very pleased with it. Right, so let's discuss the movement used, which is one of my favourite aspects of the piece. You will all be familiar with the Seiko NH34A, which, as I've detailed, the architecture is the same as the NH35A. It's a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement. It has 24 joules, it runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. 41-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable. It has hand winding and hacking and the GMT complication, as I've demonstrated. The stated accuracy of the NH34A is -20 to +40, so like the NH35A, a rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Baltany are well regulating the NH34As they're using. This one is running consistently at +6 seconds per day. So +6 is well within the -20 to +40 stated accuracy, and I think it's very good for an NH34A. I would be happy with +6, it's good enough. So are there any negatives? Well, the only two negatives are chronometer on the dial is wholly unacceptable because this is not a chronometer piece. Clearly the NH34A is not a chronometer movement. So Baltany need to delete chronometer. It says GMT chronometer and then the water resistance rating. So they just should have GMT and 600 feet equals 200 meters. Sorry, 660 feet equals 200 meters. They should delete chronometer and clean up the dial because it's too much text and specification and it's not a chronometer. The other thing they need to do is they need to sign the crown either with an engraved or embossed B. So these are the two negatives, but that's it. Everything else is good. Double dome sapphire crystal with AR is excellent. The sapphire bezel insert is done to a very good standard, and also 24-click bi-directional is strong specification. 200 meters is strong specification. As I've detailed, 100 is enough. So the quality of the finishing, quality control, build quality are outstanding. Crown execution could be improved. It could be made silky smooth, but it's good enough. But the bracelet, the head of the piece, the bezel execution, crown execution are all very good. And I really like the clasp and the bracelets. They are done to a very high standard. They deserve credit for that because no sharp edges, doesn't pull arm hairs, no sharp corners. It's a well executed Jubilee style bracelet and clasp. So I'm going to declare it good quality and good value at €279. I'm not going to say excellent quality and excellent value because of the chronometer on the dial is a mistake and the sterile unsigned crown is a mistake. If they change those things, if they deleted chronometer and they signed the crown, I would upgrade it to excellent quality and excellent value. It needs those refinements. But I'm going to recommend it to you for your consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Baltany S6074 GMT. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.